So we're in the first letter to Timothy and the 5th chapter, 1 Timothy 5. And since he made the announcement that drinks would be provided, and since verse 23 talks about no longer drinking only water, I thought I'd just mention the fact that the drinks that'll be provided for our get-together will not have any alcohol in it. Now, the police department would be delighted to hear that, because then we can drive away from the gathering not being intoxicated or under the influence in driving a motor vehicle. But let's go ahead and read chapter 5, verse 23, since I'm making light of that comment. And I think we can put it in the right context. No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for your stomach's sake and for your frequent infirmities. And we'll just stop there. So he gives a very unusual piece out of what you'll see as we begin the chapter and continue the reading of it. But it's a disjointed piece because it doesn't fit in with necessarily, at least in my thinking, the flow that I would have had if I'd been writing. But I'm not the writer. And so Paul is inspired, and he's putting he's giving Timothy a charge to do so many things to make sure the church is in order and that everything is set up properly. And without the writing of this, we wouldn't really have the instruction that we need, even today, as to how to behave. But then he had some particular things that he says in this chapter to Timothy himself, for him to be able to pay attention. And one of the things was that they had bad water supply. Now, I'm about ready to go out of town. I covered your prayers and that of Andrew Bailey and Mark Merriweather. We're going to India. And if you go to some places in the world, you know, our intestinal tracts are not up to speed for the kind of water that is available at the place. So we're going to go with bottled water for the most part, or boiled water. And it could be inconvenient for Timothy, in his case, to have boiled water everywhere he goes. So he didn't have bottled water. But he was real careful, wasn't he? He wanted to make sure he was filled with the Spirit and not with spirits. He wanted to be sober-minded and careful about what he would drink. And so, as a result, Paul tells him to mix in a little wine. He's not saying get drunk. He's just saying mix some of that in, dilute it with your water, but the alcohol that would have been present, if any, would have been added to the benefit of disinfecting, if you will, a little bit of this water that had been tainted. So he's saying do that so that you won't have an upset stomach. And it's an interesting piece that people who like to socially drink bring up as if it were their crutch. I call it a walker. They lean on it with both hands. And so they are begging to be able to drink alcoholic beverages today, when in fact it's got no applicability to this verse. Unless, of course, you just really have a bad run out of your faucet. And so we don't have that today. We are benefited by clean water and bottled water, if not, and so many other things we have available to us that we can drink that does not cause us any problem at all. No reason to drink any alcoholic beverage today. All right, let's go to the first part of the chapter. Chapter 5 and verse 1. Do not abuse. Oh, that's not what it says. Do not irritate. No, that's not it. Do not rebuke. Do not rebuke an older man. What in the world does rebuking an older man, what comes to mind when you think of the word rebuke? Scold, that's good. I'm sorry? Chastise, yes. Sorry, Chuck. Yeah, don't chastise. Don't scold. You know, there's a way to engage with somebody that doesn't Well, you know how it is. How are we to challenge an older man? How are we able to, or instructed to do that? He gives it. But rather, what are you to do? Exhort him. And how so? Like a father. That gives you the color context of how to do it. How would you correct your father or challenge your father to, maybe your dad believes in a flat earth. That your dad doesn't believe that, but I've got family members that have toyed with that. And now, how would you rebuke your father who believed in flat earth? Well, you wouldn't. You would say, now, Dad, this is how I've come to understand it. And then you show him some pictures of the globe, and you take a few other evidences, and you bring them along carefully, kindly, like you're the son talking to the father. You're going to be careful. That's the point. How old is Timothy? We don't know, but he's younger, much younger, to the point where he's concerned. Paul's concerned that Timothy, maybe people will despise his youth. That is, to resist taking his instruction because he's so young. So he must have been quite a bit younger. We don't know if he's in his 20s, he's in his 30s, we don't know. But he's younger. And as a result, he's given instruction. And I believe these instructions are uniform for the brethren. But think about how important it would have been to Timothy himself. And so that's the way I read this. I could be wrong. And all of us need to take the instruction that is given to Timothy for our own learning, for our own benefit. But especially how true it would have been for a man who had miraculous gifts laid upon him by the Apostle Paul and given a special epistle, 2 of them. Wow, could that have gone to your head had you been a young man and graduated from the Pauline preacher school? Sure. It could have gone to your head. But what is he told to do? Hey, when you're talking to older men, which he would have had to do and to correct, do so like you're speaking to a father. And that's going to take care of a lot of problems. Exhort him as a father. That is, build him up, help him understand. Exhort him like a father. All right, to the younger men. So here he is. He's got some that are older and some that are younger. To the younger men, what does he say? To the younger men as brothers. There's an attitude that he has to have, a mindset. All of us have to have. So if I'm talking to an Andrew Bailey, who I get to go with to India here shortly. If I'm talking to Andrew, do I talk down to Andrew? Because, I got him by just a few years. What is he, Matt, 18? Isn't that great? 18 years old, he wants to spend a little time preaching the gospel. Wow. I don't think I was doing it at 18. Bless his heart. How do I talk to Andrew? I'm 64, almost 65. I had to hesitate. I talk to him like a brother. Yes, I'm his elder, I'm his shepherd, but I talk to him like a brother. If he's younger, I talk to him like a brother. Timothy was taught to talk to him like a brother. How about older women? Timothy was instructed to the older women that he would talk to, that would be older, as if they were his mother. And Paul knew Timothy's mother and knew that he would have had a good relationship with his mother and his grandmother, right? He knew both of them. And as a result, he says, speak to the older ladies of the congregation, of the other saints. Speak to the older ones as like you're talking to your mother. Do you feel, you older ladies, do you feel like men sometimes don't talk to you, that are younger, don't talk to you like you're their mother? Or if they do talk to you, you wonder how their mother tolerated it. Okay. Well, this is the instruction he gives to Timothy. And then lastly, Timothy comes in contact with people who are ladies that are younger than he is. And so what does he tell him? How is he to address them? Like a sister. And then he puts a caveat on that one. With all purity. Have pure motives. When you're a brother and you have a younger sister, you're looking out for the best, protecting her, looking out for the best in her situation. So that's the instruction he gives. And I believe it's a special instruction to Timothy, but we all benefit from it. The special instruction to Timothy was, you're endowed with miraculous gifts. You're given this special charter. I give this epistle to you to distribute. You need to put things in order. You need to set things up. You make sure the church is established properly, organized properly, worshiping properly. Well, I could go to your head. So he puts him in the right humility mode, the right attitude. And we all benefit from it because we can all try to emulate that in the same way. All right, let's go down to, now that he's generally speaking, said how to treat people who are older than you, men that are older than you, women that are older than you, young men that are younger than you, young ladies that are younger than you. Then, now there's a special class of a person, a widow. And they would typically be older. They would have outlived their husbands. That's not unique, is it? Wow. What's the average lifespan of an American male? It depends on if you're in the insurance business, you look at it one way, and if you're other demographics, you might see another. But they outlive males by about 4 years right now, give or take. And so honor the widows who are really widows, who are truly widows. Indeed, you may have in your version. Let's read it. 3 through, it's a long reading, 3 through 10. I better get off my page here. This whole chapter is about being responsible. I'll be more responsible and read my slides here. Okay, let's get into the first question. We did, I think, answered these. All right. 3 through 10 in particular, 3 through 16 we'll get into. I want to ask this question before we read it. Is there evidence in 3 through 16 that family members have financial responsibilities for family, especially widows, that the church as a whole does not have? And the answer is yes. This is somewhat controversial today, as it was controversial in Jesus' day. Let's read the text, and then we'll go back into maybe an encounter that Jesus had with the Pharisees. Let's read 3 and following. Honor widows who are really widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, grandchildren. If you're a grandchild, you need to perk up and listen to this. If a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home. Piety, that is, be careful, be good, be virtuous, be tedious, particular, be a stickler for trying to do the right thing. Okay. First learn to show piety at home and to requite, to repay their parents. For this is good and acceptable before God. That's where we want to be, right? Verse 4. We want to be good and acceptable before God. That's where we want to live, right there, in the goodness of God's graces. All right, verse 5. Now, she who is really a widow and left alone, that is, without these things, and trusts in God, and continues in supplications and prayers. What are supplications again? We covered this a couple weeks ago. Supplications, begging God, please supply this need that I have. And prayers, night and day, verse 6. But she who lives in pleasure, in contrast to that, lives in pleasure, is dead while she lives, spiritually dead. And these things command that they may be blameless. Who's the they? We'll talk about that in a second. If anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Or the old King James, worse than an infidel, or American Standard. So worse than an infidel, worse than an unbeliever. How is it we've denied the faith? If we do not take care of our own. We'll cover that. Look at 9 through 10 real quick. And do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number of the church on the dole that was to the church itself out of its own common treasury would take care of out of one of the programs. Matt, how would you like to be the deacon over a administration of the daily needs of the widows? That would be demanding, would it not? Be difficult to carry on your own job. And yet, that's what they had. There were deacons appointed to do that very thing. And you get a sense of that in Acts chapter 6. Well, let's see this. Do not let a widow under 60 years of age be taken into the number, and do not, unless she has been, even then, even if she is 60, do not unless she has been the wife of one man and well reported for good works. Man, it's getting tough. And if she has brought up children, and if she has lodged strangers, and if she has washed the saints' feet, and if she has relieved the afflicted, and if she has diligently followed in every good work, every classification of good work, every opportunity that she's had. All right, so in that section, you can see it's quite a qualifying piece. Even if she's had children, those children are presumed to either have left the faith and they have become this unbeliever, this infidel, and they do not take care of her, or they are themselves passed away. We all either ourselves or know someone close to us who have outlived their own children. That's difficult. That's a special stress. That's a special grief to outlive your own children. Or another special grief is to outlive the faith of your children. That may be more traumatic. And yet, a third of our children, statistically speaking, we outlive their faith. This is a trauma that we are adhering to or experiencing. Need not adhere to it. Let's hope that we can change the tide on that. Raise our children in such a way that they would love the truth and stay true to the faith. Well, let's read further from 11 through 16, and then we'll comment on the question. So, but refuse the younger widows, refuse them to be added to this administrative dole, as it's sometimes referred to, and to be covered by something other than Medicaid and Medicare. And instead, they didn't have that in the Roman Empire. And so what did they have? They had family, which is the way it was in the great United States of America and all Western countries and Eastern countries and Africa. It wasn't the government that took care of things just a few years ago. It was family. And when the family couldn't do it or wasn't there, it was the congregation, the church. And so you had what was local, I mean really local, like under the same roof or where they came to assemble. That group of people or their families would take care of people. And that was God's plan from way back. We'll cover this in just a second. Let's read the text. This is 11 through 16. But refuse the younger women, those that are under 60, For when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, and having condemnation because they have cast off their first faith, their first hope, their first desires, their first faith, according to verse 12. And besides, they learn to be idle and wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, and saying things which they ought not. Therefore, I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. For some have already turned aside after Satan. For any believing man or woman if any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows. Now, this is not a passage we read very much, or want to apply very strictly, but it is there. And there are so many principles associated with it. Let's cover the question. So, is there any evidence in these verses that we just read, 3 through 16 in particular, chapter 5, that family members have financial responsibilities for family, especially widows, that the church as a whole does not have? Yes. You can't read this and get any other conclusion from it. That would be correct. And so, yes, we have responsibilities to our family members. You know, what was it that Jesus was talking about in Mark chapter, let's turn to Mark chapter 7. They had a problem. This is in the famous passage where Jesus is encountering the Pharisees. You remember, he says, you teach, in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. That's a real famous passage in Mark 7, verse 7. But read on. What is the context in which he's saying they are teaching as if they were doctrine, the commandments of men? What was the doctrine that they were setting aside what the true teaching from God was? Look at verse 8 in Mark 7. For laying aside the commandment of God, what was the commandment of God? That they live long in the earth. What was it? Honor, that would include love. Honor your father and your mother. Is it not written by the finger of God in a tablet of stone in those 10 commandments? Yes. Honor thy father and thy mother and thy father. Okay. So what does he say? Mark 7 and verse 8. Laying aside the commandment of God, you hold the tradition of men. What was it? The washing of pitchers and cups, as many other such things you do. All too well you reject the commandment of God, that you may keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. It was the death penalty to not honor your parents. Look at verse 11. But you say, and here's how they did it. If a man says to his father or mother, what profit whatever extra that I had left over, what profit you might have received from me is Corban. I've already given it to the temple. It's been a gift to God. Sorry, Mom and Dad, there's nothing left over. I already gave what was going to go to you. I gave it to the temple so the priests and the Levites would be okay. Well, that's not right. And so Jesus says, whatever you teach, whatever profit might have been received as honor to take care of what would have covered the widows, right? As Corban, that is gift to God, it's been given. Then you no longer let him do anything for his father and his mother. Why? In the sense that he doesn't have the resources to do it now. Making the word of God of no effect through your tradition, which you have handed down, and many such things you do. He didn't go and elaborate all of them. But we have one right here, 21st century. What do? Oh, mom and dad, you got Medicare, Medicaid. You got little g God, government to take care of you. Whoa. Yeah, we do. Maybe we wouldn't be so bold as to say it explicitly like that. What do? We just say, well, I don't think I have any money for you. And then they're hunkered down trying to figure out how they're going to pay their utility bill. Keep warm. Or around here, keep cool in the summertime. That's not right. And Christians ought not to be in part of that situation. And so, as remote as this passage seems to many when read it here in the 21st century, it has applicability to us today. It really does. All right, so my question is, do the family members have responsibility? Oh, yes, we do. To our parents and to our grandparents. That's what he says, grandparents. And that would indicate to me to our aunts and to our uncles, if our cousins aren't acting right, then they ought to be the first, but we ought to pitch in. If we're really Christians, if we're real disciples of Christ, how can we read what his encounter was with the Pharisees and not be pricked to the heart by the time we get to Paul's epistle to Timothy? We need to take care of our parents. All right, enough said, right? Maybe not. All right, how about question number 3? How about the eligibility standards and the qualification conditions for ongoing church financial assistance to widows? Is there any? Are there any? Yeah, a bunch. Look at that list again. It has to be 60 years of age. Has to have been married to one man. Needs to have a good report, a good reputation for having been involved in many good works, and brought up children. And here's one that'd be a real qualifier. Lodge strangers. How many of us have put up strangers in our homes? Even for a night. Yeah, we've got hotels and that kind of thing today, but and they didn't then, that's true. But when we're hospitable to the point that we will lodge maybe perhaps other members of the church that are visiting in town, or relatives or other people that we don't know who need help, we're practicing real Christianity, real life of Christ discipleship. Or if she has washed the saints' feet. Now, that's going to be a real qualifier. Christina, have you ever washed the saints' feet? Come on now. It's not a practice we have today. Why is it not today, but it was then? And why would it have been made the list? Because it shows humility and the ability or the willingness to serve at the lowest, most humble way, right? That's the point of application for us today. We don't have foot washing today, not ceremonial and not in practice from a cultural standpoint. We have closed, for the most part, closed-toed shoes. We have socks on the inside of that. And when we travel somewhere, we usually don't take our shoes off at the door, and we go in with our shoes. Now, there are some places where they're pretty persnickety about the carpet and that kind of thing, and we might be asked to take off our shoes. But I have yet to go someplace, even with white carpeting, that they said, we'd like to wash your feet now. That hasn't happened. All right, so that qualification may not be terribly applicable to us today, but it's only by virtue of the fact that it's just not something that would be extended to anyone because of our standard of living and our circumstances and whatnot. But the point being is the humility to get down. What did Jesus show? He came not to be served, but to serve. On the night of his betrayal at the Last Supper, what did he do? He got that towel out and he washed his disciples' feet. This is the kind of humility, the kind of service spirit that we're talking about. in this person, in any of us. These are all things that we should aspire to be able to do or be said of us. And if she has relieved the afflicted, that is, seen after those who are ill, and we know some people that are especially good at that, and diligently followed every good work. That's the catch-all. And the such like we see in some list in the epistles. Okay, so we see that there are indeed qualifications. And why would this be? Why would the qualifications be such a lengthy list? Well, to minimize, sorry, the font is a lot smaller. To minimize the number of people who would have been asking for continued assistance. And so question number 4, I'll read it to you in case you can't read the font. Why is the statement, the church can do anything the individual Christian can do, an error? Why is that erroneous? To say that anything that the individual can do, the church can do. Why is that not true? Well, how would chapter 5 give some light, pass some light on that? Would it be okay for an individual to take this widow on? Just bring her in, adopt her into your family, if you will. Would that be okay? Sure. Is that something the church should do? Be obligated to do? Be burdened to do? No. If it were something that the church should do, then it would have found its way differently spelled out in chapter 5. But it's something individually we can do, for sure. And so there are many things like that. It would be wrong for this congregation to write out a check to the college of X, because brethren are on the board there, and we call it a Christian college. I went to one of those. I met a good lady at one of those, first day on campus. I appreciate the days I had there, but it is not the work of the church to supplement the tuition and overhead at XYZ, quote, Christian University. It's not. It's something that individually, if you want to do, go for it. It is wrong to say anything that the individual can do, the church can do. That's not true. The church needs to be responsible to the point where there's elders that oversee this activity. So when we give to these various missionaries and ministries that are far-flung and whatnot, we're doing so with a report back from that group. And we do so to advance the gospel. But we're not doing so to support a general thematic thing like we would at a university or something. When we're teaching people in Kenya and in Ghana and in some of these places in Africa, in South America, in Central America, we're teaching principally. We're sending money so the resources can be made available in South Africa. Left them out. To be able to advance the gospel in the teaching of his word to those young men who indeed will go out from there and move forward. And so it's a different kind of a thing. It's mission work, in effect, not some kind of general good work. Well, I probably haven't exhausted that one, but just due to time, let's go to question number 5. Do congregations of the Lord's people have unlimited resources from which to do good works? And the redistribution of wealth, the thing that comes to mind. So do we have unlimited resources? Self-evident, we do not have unlimited resources. There is a finite budget, and we quite often have gone above it or below it, whether we're talking about the incoming or the outgoing. In fact, we never hit budget. It's either a little bit more or a little bit less. We never have enough resources to do all the good works we know could be done had we had more resources. I assure you that. And so it's sort of a question we know the answer to. Do congregations have limited resources or unlimited resources? No, we don't. We do not have unlimited resources. And so we have to be careful. And I just give you this quote from first day in economics class. What is economics? It's the systematic and rational allocation of scarce resources. That's what economics is. It's a fancy term. It's just the allocation of scarce resources. Deacons need to do this. They need to, as the elders have allocated them their resources, they have to be careful to allocate, to be wise in how they would distribute to accomplish the thing they've been given to do. Elders have to look at all that and make sure that that's being done properly as well. I'm going to quote Lady Thatcher so you can get a full compliment here today. So Lady Thatcher said this thing about economics. Said the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. And that's so true. And yet, I want to bring to our attention, and I'm a free market capitalist, but in the first century, what did the first century church do? They sold some of their assets. What was Barnabas known for? What's the first thing that comes, when you think of Barnabas, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Son of encouragement. I don't even think Barnabas' is his real name. That's the name they gave him because he was so encouraging. How was he able to take, you could do a lot more encouraging when you actually do and not just say. What was he known for? Where was Barnabas known, where was he from? He was from Cyprus. What was his background? What was the business that he was in? Real estate. No, not a broker. He owned it. He was an owner of real estate. And what does it say he did? He sold a piece of property. He sold some property, and he brought it and set it at the apostles' feet. Wow. We find that in Acts chapter 4 and verse 37. So the first century church, according to Acts chapter 2 and verse 44, the first century church redistributed. They are a brand new family. They are recognizing that, I've got brothers here I never thought I had. And so some people really don't have enough, and I've got some. So I'm going to sell some of mine and distribute and redistribute that to them. That's socialism. The ultimate socialism is what happens in a family. We don't call it socialism, we call it family. It's not the rule for the government, it's not the rule for a people, although God's people can certainly function and serve God in a socialistic society, no question. But does this negate the instruction in James chapter 2 and verse 16? What were they doing there? In James chapter 2, we know the phrase, they weren't taking care of people's needs. And so they'd slap them on the back, say, be ye warmed and filled, go in peace, and not do a thing for them. And so what was James's point? Hey, you say you got faith, but you don't do anything. So faith without works is dead. And if you're a widow or anybody in need, and somebody says, I love you with the love of the Lord, and they pat you on the back, and we're praying for you this week. Oh, yeah, it always comes with it. We're praying for you. But we're not going to give any of our pocketbook to you. What does James say? Your faith is dead. We have to look to the needs of our family members, members of the congregation here. And we're careful to live in, nice places like Keller. And so there's not a whole lot of needy people in Keller. And so it works out okay. But boy, when we broaden the kingdom and it expands geographically, and even in Keller, we're going to find that people from different economic circumstances than ourselves, perhaps, and there's a variety even among us, right? They're going to need some help. And we have to be careful to not be miserly and say, it's mine, mine. Well, it is yours while it's in your domain, but you need to be careful to not do what James says and have a dead faith. In sixth question I have is, did the Jerusalem church sell assets and distribute to the needy saints? Yes, they did, as they had real need. and I've mentioned Barnabas. All right, so let's go to the seventh question. It's very much different than this theme of economics for the most part of the chapter. Let's look at verse 22 in that area. So he's talking to Timothy about these elders. Let's just read verse 17 and following. And he's talking about this double honor. He's talking about economically benefiting the elders or the teachers that are among them. That's the double honor that he's talking about. Let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine. And it's not like the Old Testament saying, you shouldn't muzzle the ox that treads out the grain. The laborer is worthy of his wages. And so if I've worshiped with congregations that had an elder that had retired from his other work. He was still young enough to be vigorous and engaged in the work, and he was hired in just as if he were one of the ministers. But he was able to do things because he was an elder and full-time and being supported by the congregation. That was very, very helpful. I'm not pitching that today. I'm just saying it's not wrong, and it found its basis in it in chapter 5. I'm not looking for that, just so you know. All right, so this whole passage here, we've got to end there, but he gives instruction, and he gives some very unusual comments about laying on hands. Laying on hands, don't lay on hands to anybody hastily. And so I just bring your reference, and I'll have to just appeal for you to go online or get your email from Nona Ballard. She'll tune you into this particular, and you can study at home. It says in Acts chapter 8, this is important to be said. Sorry, going over 30 seconds. 18 through 29, that Timothy had his hands laid upon him by the Apostle Paul. Don't read verse 22 to believe that this laying on of hands means that Timothy was able to impart spiritual, miraculous gifts to anyone. He was not. What he's talking about here, the term laying on of hands finds itself in different contexts, in different ways and meaning. And so I've given you several of these. One place that's not violent, you might say, well, does he mean grab those elders violently? That's not what he's saying. Be a brawler? No. Be a striker? No, that's not what he means. But in the sense of bringing an accusation against an elder. Bring 2 or 3 witnesses. Don't grab an elder to bring him to trial or put him under the gun, as we say. Don't do it hastily. Be careful about that. And the passage I really like of this expression, laying on the hands, it's Jesus. No violence, no giving of spiritual gifts. What is the context? Matthew 19 says, when he laid hands on the little children that came up to him, lay hands on them lovingly, right? All right, the lesson's yours. It's a really interesting chapter, but it's kind of eclectic, isn't it? We cover every kind of thing in terms of what to mix in with your water. Thank you so much.